You're good.
Okay, so simple steps. We are on to 15 second story. Gosh, that's bad handwriting. And 3 circles. We have spent, I'll start here. We've spent this time going over identity, Father's heart, Matthew 28, and then we entered the first field. We've looked at how do you begin to approach a new field. We looked at the oikos, just Dave went over that, house of peace. And now we are moving on to the second field. So we're moving from field 1 to field 2. And the simple steps we'll be doing to engage that are twofold. We're going to look at 2 tools called the 15-second story and 3 circles. I want to provide just real quick context, and partly because as I've gone out to share the gospel and as I teach people about sharing the gospel, the nature of the gospel is so key, I think, to understanding how to begin to carry it and how to begin to share it. So could somebody read out loud and slow, Romans 1, 16 and 17. So read it loud and slow.
It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith."
Okay, so here Paul is telling us something about how the gospel works. And when I say the nature of the gospel, if I was to talk to you about the nature of gravity, for example, if I take this pen and I let go of it, what's going to happen? It's going to fall to the ground. Because we know something about how gravity is. We know about the nature of gravity is such that when I let go of that, it's going to pull it to the ground, right? So that's telling you about some of the characteristics, just the fundamental reality of how gravity works. Well, this right here is telling us some of the fundamental characteristics of how the gospel works. And let's go back. What did Paul say about the fundamental characteristic of the gospel?
The power of God to save everyone that believes.
The power of the God to save. So the gospel, and specifically the proclamation of the gospel, the announcement of the gospel, the act of that is actually creating space for the outcome. The act of the proclamation of the gospel, the way that it works, same way that if I drop this pen, the nature of gravity is going to pull to the ground. The nature of the gospel, when it is proclaimed, it creates space for itself. When the gospel is proclaimed, it creates space for itself. So very quick aside history lesson. First century Roman context, Jesus was a master at taking cultural words and using them for himself. So this idea of the gospel or evangelist or the evangelion, the gospel, was something that Jesus is borrowing from the Roman culture. And they had just this like shifting of leaders all the time, new person taking on administrative roles and over the kingdom, and so they needed to get the word out. So they would send the evangelists into the new town, and they would announce what? The good news that the chaos that's been happening, somebody has now on the throne, and there's peace that's going to come to the town because this new leader's in place. They're announcing the gospel. So Jesus, when he tells us to go announce the gospel, he's borrowing that idea that when you go into the town, it's not you're explaining, here's a new guy coming, how do you feel about that, how are you doing, trying to make sure that it fits into, the reason why I say this is sometimes we think of that. We want to make sure we don't disrupt somebody's, their life, the thought process. We want to make sure that it fits in with where they're at, right? We sometimes think about sharing the gospel that way, as explaining it. But in that context, it's no, we go into the new town announcing that reality that the new king has taken the throne, makes space for you to come under the authority of that king.
Wow, that's good.
So every time is the right time to share the gospel is what that means. Because going into the town, announcing it, makes space for it to manifest and grow. So that's why when you go to the new field, every time is the time to share that seed, to plant that seed. And I think that's a helpful way to think about it, especially as you're training somebody, because people will say, especially somebody who's not naturally wired evangelistically, they're going to say, well, I don't know, like when would I share this with my friend? Well, every time, if you understand how the gospel works, that kind of empowers your heart to engage with sharing it. Make sense?
Wow, that's good.
Okay, so all of that to say, now let's look at a couple of tools for how to practically do that in field 2. So take your blank piece of paper and draw a cross, arrow forward, arrow backwards, and this is your 15-second story. You can write my 15-second story if you want. The top, I'm going to erase that. So draw the cross, 2 arrows, and then put a little crown up here above the cross. So this is your, in short, you're going to fill this in as your story. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been in different situations where as I began to walk with Jesus, I wanted people to hear what God had done for me. And I could sit down, and if I told you the whole story, it could feel like an hour, right? If you just share, well, this happened and then this happened. And that could be really powerful, and there's space and time for that. When we share the gospel, we share our whole story about how God has met us and touched us. But there's times when, I don't know about you, but I go into like 7-Eleven, and there's a line behind me, and I'm talking with this person behind the counter, and there's an opportunity there for me to connect with them. And if I can share it really fast, and I can get really target the centerpiece of what Christ has done for me and the outcome of that, it's powerful, but it's got to be really succinct and clear. So there's space for your long story, but there's also a lot of power on if you can articulate it really short and clear, that it may have more power on it even than the long articulation of it, okay? So that's what this is, a short way to share your story in 15 seconds. So all the way at the left, you can write this phrase before the arrow. Write time in my life. Can't spell. And then underneath that first arrow, you're going to write 1 and 2. So what we're setting up here is you sharing your story before Christ. So right now, think of 2 adjectives, 2 ways to describe what was your life like before you met Christ. So I could say, Carter, there was a time in my life when I was lonely and depressed. So why don't we do this? Just stop right there, turn to your neighbor, and just do that far. Tell them there was a time in your life, and then 2 attributes about your life before you met Jesus. Ready, set, go.
There's a time in my life when I was There was a time in my life whenever I was very disenchanted.
Okay, and I'm going to cut you off because you only have 15 seconds, so it's got to be fast, okay? Okay, so there's a time in my life when I was lonely and depressed, and then here we articulate the salvation of the cross as well as the kingship of Jesus. It's helpful to get both those pieces. So there's a time in my life when I was lonely and depressed, and then I met Jesus who died for my sins and made him king over my life. So those 2 components. Died for my sins, made him king over my life, and now 2 adjectives, I feel light and I feel free. Those are the 2 I'm going to pick.
Wow.
And then we'll end with a question. Do you have a story like that? So I'm going to just model that one more time, and I'll share with Carter again. Carter, there was a time in my life when I was lonely and depressed. Then I met Jesus who died for my sins. I made him king in my life. And now I can honestly say I feel light and I feel free. And then we'll add that question. Do you have a story like that? So let's put it all together, and at your table, in your circle, you're going to practice this. So you're going to turn to the person next to you, and they're going to share, around the circle. And let's have everybody do it a couple times. So at your table, and maybe you could have a couple guys from this table come over here so it's a little bit more evened out. And everybody take a time. Let's go around the circle twice, everybody taking it.
Thanks for checking out the videos. For more resources, feel free to visit www.noplaceleftokc.com. Here you'll find all the videos, resources mentioned in the training videos. You'll have a gospel report where you can fill out if you've shared the gospel around the city, a map to see where the work is going out, Also, contact information for anyone in your area, and any of the resources trained in these videos will be under the free resources. In order to download them, just click on them, download them to your PDF, or make a copy and save it to your drive. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. Have a blessed day.